I'm actually a little bit scared to make this video today because I know there are very strong opinions on both sides of the aisle, and no, I'm not talking about politics. Today, we're talking about die cutting. Today we're diving into the world of die cutting, and more specifically, I want to compare traditional die cutting with digital die cutting and ultimately decide which one is better for card makers. Let's break it down. All right, first up, let's take a look at a traditional die cutting machine. And today I'm going to be showing the Sizzix Big Shot because this was my very first die cutting machine, but everything that I'm about to say kind of rings true for all of your traditional die cutting machines. Now, I do want to preface, this is not going to be a full in-depth tutorial on die cutting. I'm giving you just enough information so that you know which type of die cutting machine might be right for you. Now, these traditional die cutting machines like the Sizzix Big Shot or the Spellbinders Platinum 6 are mechanical machines that rely on pressure to cut pre-designed metal cutouts through your cardstock, fabric, or whatever other material you may be cutting. And the way this works is inside of your machine, you actually have two big metal rollers. I'm not sure if you can see that. There's one on top here and then one on the bottom. And essentially what you're doing is you are feeding your die, which is the metal piece that actually cuts the paper, along with the paper and the plates, which we call the plate sandwich, through your machine. And as you turn this crank here on the side, those rollers are pulling your stack of plates through, applying pressure to that die, pushing it into the paper, and cutting out your pre-designed image. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that actually looks in practice. And it's worth noting here that all die cutting machines are a little bit unique, but the general premises are the same. But just know that what I'm showing you here may not necessarily be exactly the same way that you would use a different brand of die cutting machine. So in general, the way this works is I want to create what we like to call a plate sandwich, which is basically just a different combination of plates that fit your die cutting machine. And you want to use a different combination or stack of plates depending on what technique you're actually using. In this case, we're just doing a regular old die cut. So the stack that I'm about to show you is the stack that you would use to just cut a simple shape. So you can see that I've started here with my largest base plate here on the bottom. And if you're ever unsure what order to stack your plates in, they pretty much all come with a little recipe on the back so that you don't forget. And then for our thin metal dies, I'm also going to add a thin die adapter plate, which is just a little thin plate. And then I'm going to add one cutting pad, which is a clear plate. And then this is where the fun starts. So the next thing I want to do is I'm actually going to put down my cardstock. In this case, we're going to use pink today because, spoiler alert, I'm going to be cutting out a heart because it's pretty close to Valentine's Day here. And then on top of the cardstock, we have our metal die. And this is what the dies look like. So on one side, you have this kind of thin cut blade, if you will, and the back side is just flat. So you want to put your die down on top of your cardstock with the blade facing into the cardstock and the flat part of the die facing up. From there, we're going to put one more cutting plate on top, and then it is time to crank it through. And ta-da, there we go. Let's go ahead and look at our result here. And ta-da, we have a perfect, beautifully cut heart. And that's pretty much it. We've now cut a very simple shape using our traditional die cutting machine. One of the biggest advantages of these traditional die cutting machines is that they are incredibly simple. There's no cords or technology or software to learn. As long as you have the tools you need, you can cut to your heart's delight. No pun intended. Now remember, these are capable of doing much more than just cutting simple shapes like this, but more on that in a minute. Now let's talk digital. So a digital machine like this Cricut Joy that I have here in front of me connects to software on your computer or smartphone to cut custom designs with precision. Unlike with the traditional die cutting machine that I just showed you where you have to buy those metal dies to cut your designs, you can actually design your own designs directly in the Cricut software and cut whatever you would like. Now it's important to note that the machine that I'm showing you here today is the Cricut Joy just because it is probably the most popular digital die cutting machine for card makers. There are a ton of other digital die cutting machines out there as well, not just in the Cricut lineup, but also other brands as well. My favorite digital machine right now for card making is actually probably the Cricut Joy Xtra. Let me know if you'd like to see a video in the future comparing all of the different Cricut machines, but for today we're going to keep it simple and look at the Cricut Joy. But before we go any further, I would like to give a very quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video, ClickUp. I started using ClickUp recently in my day-to-day workflow as a content creator, and it's been a complete game changer for me. As a content creator, I juggle a ton from planning and shooting new YouTube videos, designing new card ideas, coming out with new card making products, and of course, shooting content for sponsorships like this one. With ClickUp, I have everything I need organized in one place. I use their task boards to help map out my content schedule across all of my social platforms, from planning to filming to editing to posting. And I also use them to stay on top of deadlines for my most important projects, such as brand sponsorships and product launches. Recently, I've also been using their docs tool to document all of my ideas and brainstorming sessions, and it's been super convenient to have all of my ideas stored alongside my task list right in one place. Using ClickUp allows me to visually track the progress of my work, which is not only leaving me feeling organized, but also motivated. Whether you're a creative like me, a small business owner, or even a corporate executive, hi, ClickUp is your all-in-one productivity tool to keep your team organized and on track. If you'd like to try ClickUp for yourself, go to tryclickup.co/Ralph Tyndall to get started for free. And if you love it, be sure to use my code Ralph Tyndall for 20% off if you choose to upgrade. Thank you, ClickUp, for supporting creators like me and making videos like this possible. And now, back to the video. Now, before we get cutting, of course, we have to actually create our design within our Cricut software, which they call Design Space. And the great thing about Cricut Design Space is you can either use it completely for free if you would like, or they do have a subscription option. I believe it runs about $9.99 these days for a program called Cricut Access, which actually gives you access to thousands and thousands and thousands of pre-designed images as well. But today we're just going to do a simple heart, just like we did with our die cutting machine. But you can see, since this is a digital machine, we get the added benefit of actually being able to resize our heart to whatever size we would want. We could also, copy it and do multiple at once if we wanted to, which can save a lot of time. But for now, we're just going to do the one heart, and let's go ahead and cut it. Now, when it comes to using your Cricut, as you've already seen, it requires a little bit of forethought and planning. You have to go into the software and actually create the design or find the design that you want to use. And then with your machine, you're going to want to load your paper on something like this that's called a grip mat and feed it into your machine. Now, whereas our traditional die cutting machine was using pressure to cut our design out, this Cricut is actually using a blade. Inside of this little carriage, there's a little tiny blade, kind of similar to an X-Acto knife, that's actually going to draw across our paper and cut the image. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this guy. And there we go. We have a lovely little heart. Now, it's easy to see how a digital die cutting machine like the Cricut Joy here can be an absolute asset in your craft room. I love to rely on it whenever I have an idea that I want to bring to life that maybe I don't have a stamp or a die for. I know that if I can dream it up, I can create it with my Cricut. Now, two things. A, the Cricut can do a lot more than just cut. And B, yes, it gives you more flexibility, but does that mean that it's better than a traditional die cutting machine? Let's talk about a few of the pros and cons and how these two machines really differ. Now that you've seen kind of the basics of how both of these machines work, let's really talk shop and talk about why you might consider one over the other. First up, I want to talk about what you just witnessed, and arguably probably the most important part of your decision making, and that is cutting. So when it comes to cutting out shapes with your machines, you already saw that the traditional die cutting machine relies on pressure, whereas the Cricut relies on an automated blade. Now, what does that actually mean for you? Good question. Off the bat, it probably doesn't mean much, but here are some things you should consider. First and foremost is the cut quality. I find that the quality of cuts that you get from a traditional die cutting machine that uses pressure is better than the quality of the cut that you might get from a digital machine, or really just, it doesn't even have to do with the digital machine, it just has to do with using a blade in general. That cut that you get from the pressure of using a die is always going to be superior to that you get from a blade. If you look up close at the dies that you cut using your traditional die cutting machine, you'll notice that there's a little bit of a beveled edge all the way around the edge of the cut, which just gives a really pretty professional polished look. Now, on the contrary, whenever you look at the cuts that you get from a Cricut or using a blade cutter, the quality of the cut is going to be a little bit sharper, meaning you don't have that soft, professional, beveled edge look. And there's really nothing wrong with that. I mean, it still looks great, and it all comes down to personal preference anyway. But with a blade cutter, you're never going to get that soft, rounded edge. And even more importantly, unless you stay on top of your blades and make sure that they are sharp and getting replaced when they need to be, at worst, your edges can start to look a little bit jagged. Now again, that's no con to the Cricut itself. That's just the reality of using blades for cutting. You have to stay on top of your blades and making sure that they remain sharp if you want the best cut quality. And even then, just know that you're never going to have that rounded, beveled edge that you get with a traditional die cutting machine. Now, the second most important thing, and one of the reasons that people end up buying a traditional die cutting machine, even if they already have a Cricut, is for embossing. And this is an area where traditional die cutting machines like the Sizzix Big Shot really shine. You can purchase embossing folders to use with your die cutting machine, which allows you to use the pressure of the machine to create beautiful textured embossed pieces. Just update the plate sandwich to the appropriate thickness, run the embossing folder through the machine, and voila. The depth and texture you receive from an embossing folder can really elevate your project to the next level. Now, sadly, the Cricut Joy does not come with an embossing feature. I will note that the higher end Cricut, the Cricut Maker, does have an embossing feature, but again, it's using kind of a stylus pin to emboss the image. You're not getting that full coverage, pressurized, beautifully embossed image that you would with a die cutting machine. So it is a bit of a different look, and in my humble opinion, not quite as impressive as the embossed look that you get from a die cutting machine. Now, at this point, it probably sounds like I'm ragging on the digital die cutting machine and the Cricut, but I need to be clear that I love this thing, and one of the main reasons has to do with cost and affordability. And let's be real, that is one of the most important factors when it comes to all of us and making our buying decisions, is which one is the most economical and actually makes sense for me. And let me put it like this. I typically tell people that the Cricut is going to be more expensive up front. These retail for around $150 right now, whereas the Sizzix Big Shot retails for around $100. I've even found these on sale for as low as $75 on Black Friday. So the Cricut is a little more expensive up front, but in the long run, the die cutting machine is going to be infinitely more expensive than your Cricut. The reason being is the ongoing costs for a die cutting machine, in my experience, if you're an avid crafter, is going to be much more expensive because for every design that you want to cut or emboss, you have to actually own that die cut or that embossing folder, which those add up pretty quickly. The cost for a metal die set can be anywhere from $10 to $40, for example, and an embossing folder is probably anywhere from $5 to $15. So you can see how those costs really add up over time. Now contrast that to the Cricut, where you pay $150 up front, but then you have pretty much unlimited opportunity to create whatever you want. You can create your own custom designs, text, shapes, all for free. And then if you do want the added library of tens of thousands of images, you can pay $9.99 a month for Cricut access. But remember, the subscription is optional. So that being said, it's easy to see that the Cricut is going to be much more affordable in the long run. And for a lot of people, that means they can deal with maybe not having the most beautiful edges to their die cuts. Now, another thing I would be remiss not to mention here, which is another feather in the Cricut's hat, is that it can actually write, which is something the Big Shot or traditional die cutting machine can definitely not do. This little holder here in the Cricut doesn't just hold blades, it also actually holds markers and pens. So you can place a pen or a marker here in your Cricut holder and then actually use it to write your own sentiments inside your card or on the front of your card. It's also really fun to use it to address your envelopes if you want a more handwritten look on your envelope and you have terrible handwriting like myself. It's also worth mentioning that the Cricut Joy Xtra, which is the older brother of the Cricut Joy here, also has an extra feature called Print Then Cut, which allows you to print images and then use your Cricut to cut around them, which is a bit of a game changer for card making if you ask me. So again, let me know if you'd like to see a comparison video of all the Cricuts for card making at a future time. And finally, we should talk about usability. In my opinion, there's no question about it. The traditional die cutting machine is much easier and user-friendly to use, especially if you're not particularly tech savvy. There's no software to learn or troubleshoot. All you need are your tools and you're on your merry way. The Cricut, on the other hand, does have a bit of a learning curve, and for some users who are not particularly tech savvy, you may find that the experience is just frustrating. I will say the Cricut app, in my opinion, is very easy to use and learn. I've never had an issue with it, but I know that a lot of people craft in order to get offline and unplug. So if you don't want to get back online while you're crafting, maybe digital die cutting is not the way to go for you. It's also worth mentioning here in the usability category that sometimes pulling out your Cricut, especially if you have a small craft room like me and you don't keep it plugged in on your desk, pulling out your Cricut can be a little cumbersome if you just need to cut or write one little thing. It may just be easier to use your die cutting machine if you have the appropriate supplies. However, if you need to cut multiples, a lot of the same thing, That's where the Cricut really shines, because you can just press a button and then it'll automatically cut those things 10, 12 times, however many you need. Whereas the die cutting machine, you're going to be cranking your little arm for a while. Now, before I move on to my final summary and recommendation, I want to mention that both of these machines have additional features that I did not touch on here today. Really, I only highlighted cutting and embossing. Both of these machines support more than that, such as foiling, but I really just wanted to touch on the two primary uses that I see card makers using these machines for. So, which one is for you? I have a feeling that if you've made it to the end of the video, you already kind of know. I would say that if your priority is simplicity, you enjoy hands-on crafting, you're not maybe necessarily tech savvy, or you prefer not to be dealing with technology, the traditional die cutting machine is the way to go. But if you are more tech savvy, you enjoy the flexibility that the Cricut can offer you, and you are maybe limited on space. You have a small craft room, kind of like I do. You don't have space to store a ton of dies and embossing folders. I would point you in the direction of the Cricut. And all of that to say, if you ask me for my personal preference and you had me pick one of these, I don't know that I could do it. I personally see the value in having both of these in my craft room. I love my die cutting machine for the simplicity and the quality that it gives me, and I love my Cricut for the flexibility and customization that I can get. In my opinion, it's a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing, if you can afford it and if you have the space. All right, y'all, I hope that that was at least somewhat educational and you learned something new about the differences between digital die cutting and traditional die cutting. Let me know down in the comments which you prefer, and if you're looking to add one or the other to your repertoire of crafting supplies. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Be sure to subscribe, and if you don't already have the notification bell turned on, go ahead and turn that notification bell on as well so that you're notified next time I upload. Thank you so much for being here, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye, y'all.